Hi, guys. It is my distinct pleasure to announce our next speakers and introduce them to you, although I don't really think I need to introduce them, really, because everybody knows them already. But I will read their amazing bios because they are amazing people. So Karen Myers and Svea Siegman are the next presenters today. At the W3C, Karen Myers serves as Business Development Leader for the Americas and Australia regions. In this role, she engages in a variety of new business outreach and member engagement activities to support multiple verticals and industries participating in W3C, including publishing. In 2012, together with Yvonne Herman, W3C Technical Lead for Publishing, Karen helped organize a series of W3C workshops in the US, Europe, and Asia to explore the opportunity to work for new standards in the publishing industry at W3C. By 2013, the first W3C publishing interest group was formed, and since then she has been an advocate for the publishing community at W3C, managing the communications for the W3C's combination with IDPF in February 2017, as well as the launch of the new publishing business group and the publishing working group. Before working at W3C, Karen worked for Leo Burnett Technology Group as Vice President of Strategic Planning in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Frankfurt, Germany. She enjoys spending as much time as possible in her cottage in Canada. Svea Siegman is Wiley's Information Standards Lead. Svea wrote and maintained Wiley's ebook specifications and style sheets and serves as Wiley's liaison to the industry standards groups. As you all know, she is extremely active in that regard. She currently works in Wiley's Platform Architecture Group, joining her interests in content standards, accessibility, and linked data. Svea also co-chairs the W3C Publishing Working Group, helping to make the web and publishing better friends. Please welcome Svea and Karen.
Good morning, bonjour, and for our Algonquin First Nation peoples, kwekwe. Thank you so much for having us and my colleague, Svea Siegman, this morning. Say hi.
Hello.
Oh, good. Mic check. It works. We're just delighted to be here. We are going to give you a short talk a talk about going down memory lane, as well as looking at all of the standards that's going on at W3C. Some will be a little bit technical, others topics not quite as technical. Oh, good it is. First, we'd like to give a shout out to the 19th century author Charles Dickens, an inspiration for the theme Great Expectations, a book that actually was serialized in the 19th century, and it inspired, I love the book, and I love Dickens, but it also inspired us to strive high for great expectations for the work that we're doing at W3C. And our first step into the publishing industry actually began at the Tools of Change conference in 2013 in New York, where our CEO, Jeff Jaffe, was a keynote and talking about this concept of bringing more expertise from publishing into the web. And so that was the title of his talk. And when he learned that Dickens had published the book serially, he said, oh, well, he was a 19th century blogger. And so we're going to go through a few timeline things pretty quickly. So as Josh mentioned, in 2013, we actually began a series of workshops, and the publishing interest group was formed. That's where I first met Svea. We met in New York, and many people in this audience as well. And that was our first, we had about 100 people who came from the different publishing sectors to tell us what's wrong with the web for publishers. It was a great learning experience, and it was just 5 years ago. Then we moved to Japan, where we learned about all of the challenges that vertical text had and other languages. That was hosted in Tokyo. And then we learned about some of the workflow and CSS and other needs for publishers on the web. So that was all very educational. And then in 2014, we began to collaborate with the International Digital Publishing Forum. and a first draft for requirements of Latin text layout and pagination was developed by this interest group, which, by the way, Svea was also co-chairing at that time. So the collaboration with IDPF included presentations at various conferences. You may recognize some of these folks here. And then we published the CSS first public working draft in 2015, and also documents for the Open Web Platform was a white paper that was presented, I believe that was at Books and Browsers in San Francisco. So then in 2016, we continued the collaboration with IDPF, and our founder and director, Tim Berners-Lee, presented a keynote painting a vision for a combined, a merged vision of IDPF and W3C, and what else the Open Web Platform could be doing for publishers. And we announced our intent to explore combining those two organizations in May of 2016. And that was the press release for that. And last year, as Josh also mentioned in the introduction, we actually officially combined in February of last year and started the roadmap for publishing at W3C. And that was the announcement. So now, as W3C, our mission is to lead the web to its full potential. Very broad mission, but it's open for so many opportunities. And just quickly how we're organized. We actually at W3C are combined organizations with 4 different universities. And it doesn't actually exist as a legal entity. It's a joint venture agreement with these different universities. And we have about 70 full-time staff around the world, and they are the staff contacts that facilitate. But the work itself is done by the members, by the volunteers at W3C. So just a couple words about the strategic roadmap. So the combination of adding EPUB and HTML5 was the compelling reason to bring us together so that future versions of EPUB would continue to be based on W3C web technologies. And we're continuing, as Rachel said, to develop EPUB 3.1 at W3C in the community group, which is free, and that's great. So no problem with that at all. We do have the longer-term vision, which Svea is going to tell you about in a few minutes, about creating this online-offline packaged format for the web. And to advance the Open Web Platform is the third part of our talk today about different standards that are relevant for publishers. So we'll go through some of those later today, too. So the convergence vision that web publications, possibly packaged for offline use, share a unified technical architecture and rely on the latest standards of the Open Web Platform. And essentially, we want to make sure that any publication is a first-class citizen on the web. So how have we organized ourselves at W3C for this new publishing activity? I believe Lisa mentioned that she is co-chair of the business group, and that is sort of this overarching steering committee, and the business group is also a very lightweight way to participate in W3C, and that provides the various strategic direction for the working group and the EPUB community group. Then we also have the working group, which is where the standards are developed. So only W3C working groups do standards. Other groups look at use cases and requirements and notes and things. We also, of course, are doing a lot of community building and outreach. We had our first publishing summit in November last year, and we have an EPUB, or not an EPUB, a Digital Publishing Summit Europe coming up in May in Berlin. So now I'd like for Svea to take you through some of the activities in greater depth about what's going on in these various groups for publishing.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what the difference between each of these groups is, how you can get involved, and how you can get involved. There are going to be a lot of links in these slides. Karen and I will share with you at the end of the presentation how you can download this presentation so that you can access all of these links so that you can get involved. So this is like the 17th time you've heard about the Publishing Business Group today. This is a link to the home page. The Publishing Business Group is chaired by Lisa, you met earlier today and yesterday, Luca Dran from Hachette Europe, and Rick Johnson of VitalSource, 3 phenomenal people who are so much fun to work with. We meet bi-weekly on Tuesdays at lunchtime on the East Coast. If you're in California, it's a breakfast meeting. If you're in Europe, it's dinner. If you're in Asia, it's past your bedtime, but a lot of people from Asia join anyway. I mean, if you're in Australia, you're kind of out of luck. But we try. But actually, we are starting to have meetings, I think, once a month at, I think it's 7 p.m. Eastern, so that we can accommodate people all around the world. So what is it that we do in this meeting? We try to plan events around the world, which is great. We're working on a roadmap for what it is that the publishing activity at the W3C is planning. We have a roadmap group, which had 2 meetings, and then we declared ourselves done, which is the best way a task force would work. The best thing a task force can do is close, because that means you actually finished your tasks. In parallel, we're working on some event planning, as Karen mentioned, and there is a participation fee for participating, and Karen will be able to provide you with the details of that because I can't keep track anymore. So there are a lot of task forces. We have accessibility in every one of these groups. EPUB roadmap, as I mentioned, so we know that the community groups are responsible for EPUB maintenance, but what exactly that means is determined by the business group. EPUB check fundraising, I have a whole slide devoted to this. I'll come back to it in a minute. Best practices, that's Rachel's world. She spoke a little bit about that. If you want to contribute to EPUB best practices, just talk to Rachel. She'll tell you what to do. We talk about internal coordination, how we coordinate with other W3C working groups. Karen and I are going to talk a little bit about some of the W3C working groups that might interest this group. There are how many working groups in the W3C now? Over 50. That seems overwhelming. We can tell you which ones might interest you, and then you might have a side interest in real-time communication, and you can just hop into that group if you're really interested and you're a W3C member. There's also external coordination. There are so many organizations around the world that focus on publishing. BookNet Canada, BISG, LIA. How do we coordinate everything, and how do we make sure that everybody knows what it is that we're working on and starts to adopt the standards? So we have a committee working on that. And then ISO standardization, which is my personal favorite. It's not actually something that I like to get involved in, but it's really important because ISO standardization is what makes this a truly international standard. Not all organizations, governments recognize W3C standards. So it's very important that we get EPUB to ISO standardization level. And if you really are a glutton for punishment and like to work on the nitty-gritty details of how to make something as standard as possible, get involved in ISO standardization. I promise you it will be rewarding. EPUB check. Who uses EPUB check? Who relies on EPUB check? Who thinks EPUB check is the most important tool that we have in this tool chain? Who has contributed to EPUB check? Okay, 4 people in this room. Who thinks that if we don't continue to develop EPUB check, your tool chain will collapse? Who's going to contribute funding to EPUB check? Okay, here's the problem. There are right now 2 developers working on EPUB check, both of whom have full-time jobs, full-time families, and they are volunteers. We have been relying on volunteers to develop EPUB check since EPUB check was developed. The volunteers have been called away to their full-time jobs. EPUB check has had a little bit of development here and there for the past 2 years. We developed a task force to work on developing, maintaining, and overhauling EPUB check so that it would be easier to contribute to EPUB check. And we came to the conclusion that it needs a true full-time developer to do about a year's worth of work to get it into shape. If we are going to have EPUB check to support EPUB 3.2, and we can talk about what EPUB 3.2 means in a minute, then we need a serious fundraising campaign. If you, your company, your Kickstarter campaign, your cat wants to contribute to EPUB check, please contact Bill McCoy at the email address here, or you can contact me or Karen and we'll put you in touch with the right people. We will not have EPUB check if we do not have this funding. I'll move on. The EPUB 3 community group, chaired by the wonderful Dave and Rachel. What do we do in the community group? First of all, it's free to join. Yay, sign up right now. Just Google EPUB3 Community Group W3C if you missed that URL. EPUB 3.2 spec work is done in this group. Why are we doing EPUB 3.2? For a number of reasons, some of which are ISO standardization. Basically, 3.1 wasn't getting adopted. 3.2 rolls back some of the stuff we thought that we could do in 3.1, and 3.2 should be easier to adopt. Dave is the primary person working on 3.2. Talk to him. Rachel's working on best practices, which will tell all of you how to do 3.2 in the real world. A lot of the work is done in GitHub. If GitHub scares you, Benjamin will give you a session on how to use GitHub. There are phone calls as needed. Dave doesn't really like talking on the phone, so he tries to do everything online. It's free. Everyone can participate. What's the story with EPUB 3 today? We heard a lot of scary statistics yesterday, like only 30% of the books that Kobo gets are in EPUB 3. The story in education is very different. Of the 100 most used titles that VitalSource got last year, 77% were EPUB 3. That's a less scary statistic. So the numbers are all over the place. In Japan, in Korea, 100% of the titles are EPUB 3 because they never used EPUB 2. So the numbers are different all over the world. Whatever it is, we have to bring EPUB 3 up, certainly in trade. I'll let Dave take a picture, then I'll move on. The Publishing Working Group. This is what I live and breathe every day of my life. I co-chair it with Garth Conboy of Google, one of the original inventors of EPUB. What is it that we do? We make the combination of traditional publishing and the web complete in terms of accessibility, usability, portability, distribution, archive, offline, and reliable cross-referencing. We talk every week, and a lot of times between those phone calls, there's a lot of work done on GitHub. We have a face-to-face meeting in this lovely city in 2 months, and my son will be there. And you do need to be a member to participate. So we take publications with all of their traditions of the thousands of years of publishing, and we want them to become first-class citizens of the web. So what is a publication? It can be many resources. We all know what is involved in publishing in this room. Text, videos, research data, all of that stuff. We're very big on saying not just books in our publishing working group. I work a lot on scholarly publishing. There are people who are involved with, we just got new members from NASA. I love to see what they publish. That'll be lots of fun. So we're talking about publishing the single work as an abstract unit with an address, meaning something like a URL, a single, and making sure that, that the integrity is maintained as a single unit. So the way that EPUB is a single unit, even though there are lots of things in that unit, we want this to be able to exist on the web. And a publication, as I said before, it could mean anything. Trade books, textbooks, scholarly articles, magazines, legal publications, and some people like to point out even that letter that your church secretary publishes. The Jews like to talk about the church secretary. So, so what are the requirements? It needs to be addressable. We need to be able to point to it. So one of the things that EPUB has perhaps lacked over the years is that it doesn't exist on the web. I cannot point to that EPUB unless I do something specific with it, unless I post it on a website, and it's still not on the website. So it doesn't live on the web, it's just in a box outside of the web. We talk about EPUB as a website in a box. I need to be able to point to that, and ideally point to things inside the EPUB with a URL as well. What are the components of this publication? What sequence do they live in? What's the default reading order or non-default reading order? We could choose our own adventure, perhaps. How do I describe the parts of the publication? How do I personalize it? We've come to expect that I can adjust the font size, adjust the background color, maybe even change the font in a publication. How do I annotate it, highlight it? How do I put notes in it? And how do I take it offline, which is the thing that we expect from EPUB. It lives offline, but how do I take something that lives on the web offline? So now, in 2018, what is it that we've accomplished now that we've been working on this for over a year? In the W3C, the first stage of publishing is called First Public Working Draft, which is exactly what it sounds like. You put out your preliminary version of a specification for the world to see, here are the ideas we have, give us feedback. So we put out 3 of those in January. That's actually a lot of work, 3 documents in 1 month. It took us like a year, but that's great. So take a look at these documents, give us your feedback. I think we're on revisions of these documents already, but they're still considered first public working drafts. And I wrote up a technical summary, and I plan to write up an updated technical summary in the next, probably in late April, after my vacation. And I do regular status updates on this wiki, so take a look. And let me go through what is new about these documents. So the treatment of the publication as a whole, that's what I keep talking about. Right now, there's nothing preventing you from putting a book on the web as these are 3 chapters, and each chapter is its own HTML document. But what ties them together? So we need something that tells the browsers to treat these things as one whole publication. And we are calling these affordances, thanks to Benjamin. How do we make the web do what we want it to do? What is different from the way the web works today? So here's the example we always like to do because it's easy to wrap your mind around. I want to search all of these files in the publication as a whole document, not as 3 separate documents. And again, I want to be able to take it offline, and importantly, I want to be able to address this. I want to be able to point to it. This is particularly important in scholarly publishing because I need to be able to cite it. People's jobs live and die by citations. And then we want to go to packaged web publications. It's exactly the same thing as web publications, but there's a container around it. We haven't figured out what the packaging format's going to be, but we're considering relying on a work in progress as the combined effort of the W3C and the IETF, the Internet Standards Organization, which is called web packaging, although that name is also up in the air because it sounds too much like something else. And at this point, the packaging format it's just the gravy, but at some point is going to become more important, where it's all a work in progress. So again, if you're interested, anybody can join the email list. You don't have to be a member. Just follow that link to join the email list. If you're interested in participating, you do need to be a W3C member. You can be a TPI member or a transitional member. So if you were a member of the IDPF, you can join as well. We do have some task forces. We have the Accessibility Task Force led by Avnish Singh from DAISY, the Affordances Task Force led by Mateus Texiera, whose name I'm sure I'm butchering, and Jasmine Mulliken, the Manifest Task Force led by Benjamin and Roman, and we're working all of these details out now. And now I'll pass this back to Karen.
Since we have some extra time, I think we'll pause here for a moment because that was a lot of information. And so maybe pause for some questions at this time about the actual publishing work itself, the community group, the business group, and the details of the working group that Svea just outlined.
So I asked this question yesterday, and I'm going to ask it again. The one concern that I have and the one interest that I have in EPUB is that if we remember the web in the sort of philosophy of Tim Berners-Lee is for everyone, and EPUB should be for everyone. And right now, everybody who's in the conversation are publishers or affiliated with publishing houses. And I wrote a whole thesis about this because what I'm really concerned about is the fact that this is a non-transparent, accessibly, it has non-transparent accessibility. So you need to be in the system to create and access. So I want to see, I'm trying to see whether or not we can have a conversation about people who want to produce publications but are not within the publishing house infrastructure. In other words, self-publishing.
So it's up to people who are in that community to join us, as Dave.
But we have to be members.
No, the community group's open to anyone.
Yeah, and I'm a member of the community group, but I'm just, it's.
Are you on the GitHub? Or have you started watching GitHub? Because that's where all the work actually happens.
Well, I'm trying to, but it's, the conversation is really difficult to understand. So at some level, I can do some of it, but I can't do all of it. And I'm only one person, and I know that there is, it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. If the only people who are in the room who are talking about this format are all coming from the same place, then the conversation is not, this is for everyone. This is a conversation.
It's not just publishers talking. We do have reading system developers. We have university presses. We have large publishers, trade publishers, scholarly publishers. We should talk afterwards about how it's maybe easier to get involved. We do have other slides about how to get involved, but I can't be the person to tell you how to manage your time.
No, I think that's great feedback, because if there are different levels of participation, education, we have groups at W3C, for example, education and outreach for accessibility, and that's what they do, is help people understand how to use the W3C standards. And perhaps there's a need that you've just identified that we should take a look at.
Yeah,
which
there's
is
a
how
hashtag.
to do more.
If you're interested, there's a hashtag called #WeNeedDiverseBooks, and it is essentially a movement, and it's coming out of libraries in the U.S. to try and encourage people to produce their own books because they're coming out of communities and cultures and sort of systems where the publishing world isn't really reflecting their,
No,
their
that's
stories.
great feedback. Why don't we speak offline? I think that's great. Love to maybe even have a little Buffett lunch if that's another a topic
So
of interest for people.
If there are no other questions, I think some of our other slides do address this concern.
Okay, I guess we'll move on to the next section, which is looking at how we are advancing the web for everyone, we hope, in many different areas. And we've chosen 5 to highlight this morning. The first is user experience, including all kinds of things we'll talk about in a minute: accessibility, security and privacy, data and annotations, and the immersive web.
Light topics.
Yes, light topics, right, before the break. So I know that there was a CSS workshop. I know there'll be more conversations about CSS yet today. So we just wanted to highlight this briefly. But the CSS group, thanks to many people who are contributing, is much more aware of the needs of publishers. Everything from drop caps, footnotes, pagination, et cetera, which you'll hear about. There are many, many new CSS modules, so please take a look at the CSS pages on the W3C site. And another area that the W3C has been working on is web fonts. And just a couple weeks ago, we published a new recommendation on web fonts. And these, it's 2.0. They call it WAF. Kind of sounds like wharf, but it's WAF. And what's exciting about it is they're very compressed formats. And they are a means, you can use CSS at font face rules. And it significantly improves the compression efficiency, particularly on mobile. So that's why this is a real advancement. So if you are looking, to use new fonts, check out WAF as a mobile-friendly and compressed format. It's also been tested, and it's being supported in most of the major browsers. So we're pretty excited about this new technology, and if anyone wants more in-depth details, see me afterwards, and I can connect you with some of those technical experts. It's co-chaired or chaired by Vlad Leventovsky from Monotype, and Chris Lilly is our staff contact there. User experience, another area. Well, we call it I-18N because that's the number of letters in internationalization. But this is a marvelous area that W3C does to really make the web accessible for everyone in every language. And the whole goal is that we do a horizontal review of all W3C specifications to make sure that there are not internationalization challenges with those specifications. We have a pretty large group, but they're definitely looking for more people. And if you have expertise in different languages, we very much welcome. And in particular, we're looking right now at Arabic languages. There are some gaps there. We have what we're calling a heat map, or this language matrix. If you click on that link, it's this huge graph with all these different cubes that show you what are the current state of different languages. We also need more First Nation experts. And so if there are people in this room, or if you know people who would like to be seeing the web being friendlier to the numerous First Nation families of languages, Inuit, Algonquin, et cetera, please let me know, and I'd love to connect you with our internationalization folks. And of course, text layout. They also look at how it's rendering and making sure, the line breaking, and they also worked very closely with the Japanese page layout. I've learned so much about, right to left languages. I didn't even know that Mongolian, you read this way, like up and down vertically. So it's really a very fascinating area So for those of you who are looking to publish internationally and make sure that what you're doing is effective, take a look at internationalization, and if you have the skill sets, they would welcome you with open arms, I assure you. So back to Svea on accessibility.
Hello. So another area of horizontal review is accessibility. Horizontal review means that every W3C spec gets reviewed by a team of experts in that area, and you can't pass on to the next phase. It's like you have to unlock that level of achievement to move on to the final phase. It's like, if you're a gamer, you understand. I am not a gamer, but I talked to Benjamin. So you have to pass accessibility achievement in order to move on to final phase. So let's talk about how accessibility affects you. If you've been here for more than a few minutes, you already know that accessibility is crucial to your EPUBs. If you're not worrying about it, you should be. So the W3C defines accessibility for the web. Legislation in many countries actually points to the W3C specifications, such as WCAG. This is where the action is. And let's point out that WCAG 2.1 was just published. It's the first update to WCAG in about 10 years. Huge accomplishment. Changes to the specs often means changes to your workflows. And how do you find out about changes? So there's a link here to the WAI-ARIA email list. That's the Web Accessibility Initiative Interest Group email list. You don't really need to remember what that all stands for. If you go to that link, you can sign up to follow that email list. What's so magical about this email list? It's where you can get updates about news updates, like when a spec is changing, but you can also ask questions there, and you'll get answers. You can say, when is it appropriate to put ARIA label on whatever element? And the people who answer your questions are the people who actually wrote ARIA, or the people who are developing JAWS. It's pretty magical. When you sign up, you'll see that there are some guidelines for the kinds of questions that are appropriate to ask, and one of the guidelines is read the archives first so that they don't get the same question 17 times in a week. But it's a really awesome resource, and that, of course, is free because it's an email list. And let's also keep in mind that WCAG applies to EPUB just as much as it does to the web. So let's talk about what other standards exist. WAI creates the specifications, guidelines, and best practices. I think we've all heard a lot about ARIA and WCAG. And again, WCAG 2.1 addresses web content for things like it's semantics for anybody with a disability, not just with a disability. It's really about usability. So low vision, cognitive, mobile accessibility, all sorts of abilities and disabilities. It makes it better for all of us. EPUB ARIA, I happen to be involved in writing that, but it was co-authored by the Publishing Working Group. Actually, it was then the Digital Publishing Interest Group and an ARIA task force. If you want to get involved in writing the 1.1 of that, I'm the person to talk to. But there are so many more accessibility specifications out there. There are the accessibility API mappings, which is what actually tells assistive technology how to read ARIA. There are the user agent accessibility guidelines, and there are the oh, I never remember what this stands for. ATAG is something else. Somebody help me out.
Authoring guidelines.
Thank you. Authoring guideline, authoring tool accessibility guidelines. That's it. But there are a lot of documents out there. But did you even know that there are authoring tool accessibility guidelines? If you're responsible for writing an authoring tool, it needs to be accessible as well. Of course it does. But there are guidelines for how to make that accessible. But again, how can you get involved? So many people are daunted by this. There's the WAI-ARIA email list. Another phenomenal resource is what Karen started to mention before, is the WAI Education and Outreach website. There is so much information on there. It can be a little bit overwhelming. Where do you even get started? The first place to go is this website. Click on the links there, go there. The first thing you'll see is Getting Started. Go to the Getting Started page. The first thing you'll see is how do people with accessibility use the web, the business case for accessibility, and a number of links like that. Go in there, get your toes wet, see what happens. You'll learn a lot. And then, of course, I will say join a group. The best way to keep track of evolving standards is to help write them. This is the way that I advocate all the time. We're running out of time.
So another area that's also what we call the horizontal review of W3C specifications is security and privacy. We have a number of security work going on, web app security, web encryption. So if you're really concerned about security, happy to talk more about that afterwards. And very excited that just this week, the Web Authentication Working Group published its first, or actually has moved a candidate recommendation, which is one step away from becoming a final standard or recommendation. And the Web Authentication API enables you to point to a public key access to create better authorization for the user. So think about, for example, either biometric and/or YubiKey with the password in the browser. So it's a multi-factor authentication, so it will be much more secure. So we're very excited about this work as well. Privacy also, we have a group that looks at any aspects of privacy across the work that we're doing at W3C. And we're also looking at identity, which is the verifiable claims work.
So I'm loosely involved with verifiable claims, and I'm just going to go over it very quickly and how it is that it could affect publishing. The idea behind verifiable claims is that we share a lot of information online, and so much of what we share is not secure. The thought process behind the verifiable claims data model and the decentralized identifiers group that they're working with is that I share one piece of information, such as my driver's license has the information that I am capable of operating a motor vehicle. And I can share just that bit of information, and there is some encryption behind it, and therefore it is secure for me to share it. The verifiable claims data model provides a way to express the credential on the web in a cryptographically secure and private way, and it's automatically verifiable. I'm not going to go into more details than that now. If you are interested, you can talk to me later. Here's a little diagram explaining how that works. Basically, there's somebody who the holder or the subject of that claim can store, retrieve, and move the claim, and then pass it along to other parties. But how is this relevant to publishing? We do a lot of things in the publishing world that require information such as this. I have a learning management system. I offer test-taking services. I sell books. I authorize a library or I'm a library that authorizes users to borrow my books. How do I get any of that information, and how is it secure? So I've put some of the use cases up here that are relevant, and some of these are already in the verifiable claims use cases document, and some of them will be in there soon. But the first example, a learning management system user needs to identify herself for an exam. She's required to provide her credentials to prove her identity before the test. Then to allow the system to issue a verifiable claim regarding the results of her test. So a student needs to get the results of her test. How does she prove that she is actually the test taker? So these are just some examples of how verifiable claims could be used. Again, it's a little bit more complicated than what I'm getting into now, and I'm happy to talk to you about it later. But it's an area that publishers might want to explore because we deal with users, identities, and retail all the time.
So another area is data, and we heard a little bit about that this morning. There are a number of activities around data at W3C. We're not going to highlight all of these here today, but we did want to talk a little bit about the annotations work because that is very relevant for publishers. And the web annotation, this is an example from Hypothesis, which has built their system on top of the web annotation specification that was just developed last year. And I had a demonstration a couple weeks ago. It's really amazing how you can search the different annotations and create annotation groups, and it's really very impressive. And so we think that a lot more publishers will be wanting to use it, but also in the classrooms, in school settings. There are many different applications for annotations, and beyond publishing per se, academic community as well as government, all different kinds of uses for web annotations. So basically, you can annotate anything on the web, and it's searchable. And so we're really looking forward to seeing more annotations work. it is growing. As you can see, just in a very short time, this is data from Hypothesis and their platform, how quickly in just a couple of years it's taking off. So that might be something interesting for you to check out. Another area is permissions, obligations, and expressions, which we nickname PO. A shout out to the author there, but not exactly. It actually was based on ODRL, and ODRL came to W3C through a free community group, and they worked on it, and then that went on to the standards track. So this is another way we innovate and work with the communities to bring things forward. So this is really important for publishers because it is an API basically that points to the rights management and what is around an image or a video, what is associated with it. So this is a way to provide licensing information about a specific resource. JSON LD, we're looking at possibly adding new features to that. We may reopen that work. And data on the web best practices became a recommendation last year, and there's a data model and lots of other things going on there. And then finally, the last area, delighted that Lisa actually previewed this a bit. We have a community group in W3C that's working on WebVR, very large global community group. They've held workshops, and they are looking at bringing it onto the standards track this year. So if immersive reading experiences, interactivity is part of your shiny object that you're interested in, please join the free community group. And we think this also will be interesting for educational publishers, particularly those doing training. Think about looking at automotive engine or medical and being able to literally see in 3D and interact with it. So the potential there is very exciting. It's still right now a bit focused heavy with the entertainment segment coming out of the gaming. We have a lot of entertainment companies in W3C, but it's open to everyone, so we really hope to hear more of the publishing use cases in the WebVR area. So we've gone through, like Dickens, a lot of interesting characters here today. We talked a little bit about the publishing at W3C activities. We talked about these characters known as WAF and PO and I18N, web annotations, WebVR, lots of acronyms we use at W3C, unfortunately, that sometimes need some explaining. But we were hoping that the storytelling and these characters will be compelling, as some of the Dickens novels are, with his interesting characters for you, and that we hope to see more of you participating in whatever ways you can in your organizations and spread the word. And so I think you're going to wrap us up about the next steps with Toronto.
So where do we go next? There's still a lot of work to do. We have a face-to-face meeting for the publishing working group here in Toronto. Talk to me about attending. And there's still a ton of work to do. I said we just have first public working drafts. We need to bring these all to TR. You can learn what all of these cool acronyms mean if you come work with me. And thank you very much. We now have time for questions. We have 3 minutes and 42 seconds.
So let's say that I just joined the W3C, either in the community group or the working group or something like that, and I start seeing all these emails coming through from the GitHub repository, and I'm starting to freak out because I have no idea what's going on. Are there any resources for me?
Yes, there are.
So, not like full stop, just yes, and then we'll...
So first of all, Karen, do you want to start, and then I'll tell people what I do in the publishing group?
So first of all, please feel free to reach out to folks like myself. My role is to help educate and provide an easy on-ramp for whatever interest areas you might have in W3C that may be paid or not paid. It doesn't matter. That's part of my role, is community building and outreach. So we do many, many briefings. We've also begun doing more webinars, some with other associations like BISG, to help do some of this education. So we know there's a lot of email going on at W3C. So be forewarned, if you do join an email list, that is a lot of activity So you do have to sort through that. But we're very generous and happy to have conversations and help explain where things are and what's going on.
So for the publishing working group, I send a welcome email, which also has a fire hose of information. It has been described as a fire hose. It can be a little bit overwhelming at first. I also started to do a newbie meeting. We had one so far. I got great feedback from the newer members. The newer members are now editing our newbie page to make it friendlier for new people, because what happens if you have people who have been involved for 5 years writing a welcome page for new members, the eyes are like the ones with cataracts instead of the newborn eyes. So we're working on that. I also am a member of the W3C's Working Group Effectiveness Task Force, and we're trying to bring some of these welcome to new members things to the whole W3C. That's chaired by the wonderful Natasha Rooney. And so we're trying to figure out how to ease people into the W3C a little bit more, because like you come in and all of a sudden there's like, oh my God, the entire web wants my help. And I have no idea what real-time communication means. And that's okay, because you don't have to. And you don't need to be an expert in every area. One thing that we like to stress in the publishing activity is that you don't have to be a technical expert. We need your business cases. We need your little tiny niche area of expertise. Don't be overwhelmed. We were all overwhelmed when we started. I said this yesterday when we were having the discussion about volunteerism. For the first 2 years that I was involved in the IDPF, I didn't talk. I just scribed every meeting because I felt like I couldn't contribute everything else. If all you do is come to a meeting and listen, you're still helping. You're probably helping yourself more than anybody else, but it's still great. But that's really, we do try to be welcoming. I'm pretty approachable, I think. People tend to come to me with their life issues, not just their W3C issues. So you can come to me with questions, and I might send you on to one of my delegates, but that's how we swing. Any other questions?
I'm just wondering how, in your membership, what group of children's publishers are there, and who is representing improvements in the quality of, say, picture books in EPUB?
I think Lisa's probably best equipped to answer that.
I think a lot of, so the standard is not necessarily about improving the quality of the books. It's about making sure that the features are in the standards so that we can support the books. And we haven't seen a lot of requests for new features for children's books. There are implementation issues with getting some of those things supported in reading systems, which is some of the work that we do between the publishing business group in W3C and all of the other standards organizations and best practices organizations out there. It's also a piece of what Rachel's been gathering for the community group in terms of best practices, so that if somebody solved a problem, we can write it up as a best practice so it can be shared among the larger community. And as a publisher of children's books, I actually do a lot of that, representing what we have, but it would be great to have more voices.
And Lisa mentioned before that she's putting together a grid to compile all of these gripes that we have. If you want to contribute to that, I think emailing Lisa or joining the community group might be the best way to get involved in that.
And we'd like to call it requirements, not gripes.
Right, good point. Requirements.
Yeah, I was just curious to hear you talk, or either of you talk a little bit about how you're able to operate now versus the IDPF prior to joining the W3C, and just what's been working for this about what's been working about this for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I certainly would invite other members, former members of the IDPF, to comment. I would say that one of the things that the IDPF combining with W3C brought was a massive force of experts who got the attention of our traditional web community for whom anytime we introduce a new vertical, whether it was media and entertainment or telco, it's always a bit of a disruption and a learning curve for them. And to have so many experts come forward from publishing and say, this is really important to our work, and you need to pay attention to this and help us fix it, I think that's probably one of the best impacts, and the respect that the publishing folks have gained with the communities and trying to bring them together, I think has been very positive for W3C. I like to tell a story. Over 10 years ago, we started a vertical with media and entertainment. And I remember doing a workshop, and some of the traditional web developers were mystified why the media people would want more than one channel for video on the web. And the media people were just astonished, like, how could you not understand that we need multiple channels? And so it's those kinds of dialogues that really help to bring the consciousness and education forward. Yeah, and the brave souls that sometimes say, you know, this really, really is important. You may not understand why, but there's millions of people that are going to depend on whatever solution that is being proposed. So thank you for the question.
I would also say that the shift to the W3C has helped us to get more international participation and wider participation. And there was this sort of misconception about the work that we were doing in the IDPF, that it was incredibly broad and very book focused. And it really, like, the same people who were driving that work are driving the work now. There's just more people involved. And broader groups involved in it. So I think it's been really good. And seeing where we're headed now with 3.2 this year, and getting that up to an ISO spec is a big move forward.
And from my perspective, it made my job easier because I was chairing 2 working groups, and now I chair 1.
What I'm sort of countering with the perceptually disabled community and wanting to access EPUB is, has there been any thought of how to promote EPUB to the educational community? Because what we're encountering is we provide Kurzweil, accessible Word, accessible PDF, but I'm seeing the future as EPUB, yet I'm seeing also a resistance because it's new. It's almost like VHS versus beta, right? And everybody's thinking beta was better, but VHS was the one that was preferred because it was just easier. Is there a thought towards how to promote the benefits of EPUB to the educational community? And by promote, I mean help them, so if they get a file that's good from a publisher, but that may not meet the student's particular needs, where they can actually change the file?
So some of the work in the community group might help you a little bit, some of the best practices work. I know that there are some organizations like BISG that are starting to do some kind of publicity campaigns around EPUB. I hope that the work on metadata will help, because once people realize what accessibility features an EPUB has, that might actually make it more appealing to a DSS office. A lot of what is lacking around adoption in the education market, I think, is a lack of awareness of the possibilities.
So we're seeing,
And certainly organizations like VitalSource, where a lot of the education titles are published, are doing a lot to support the education the education of the marketplace, not the education titles per se. So when retailers in particular start supporting metadata and exposing the metadata in their stores, so that I go to the bookstore and I don't just see something like title, but I can click on that and I can see has alt text, has image descriptions, has closed captioning, I think that the problems might start to fade away. But it's also about education. Which I don't know that that's necessarily something that the W3C would do. The W3C is not generally in the area of advocating more in spec writing, but I think the community group might start to address that, and if not that group itself, the group that focuses on liaising with external groups might be able to help you. So that is in the business group.
Yeah, we'd love your ideas on that, maybe during the break.
What I was, again, I'm just throwing the idea out, it would be useful at a forum like this to invite frontline users to say, and by frontline users, I'm not just talking about the advisors that support the students, but imagine having your STEM using students who are perceptually disabled saying, this is what we encounter on a regular basis. It's not just I got an email yesterday, the individual, I provided him with Braille and accessible Word, and he said he couldn't listen to it and type at the same time. So I actually asked for a separate DAISY file. And it's that kind of, I never want perfect to be the enemy of the good. I love where we're going. It's just, the resistance I'm seeing is because they don't know how to make the changes when they're going to be required, because they could get a great file from a publisher, but it may not meet that student's particular needs, so it has to be augmented to meet those needs.
That's great feedback. Rachel, did you want to add anything to that?
So I can help a little bit there. So we're starting sort of like a ground up effort for education. So we have a task force in BISG that's focused on this. It's largely educational publishers. We also have a working group in IMS Global that's focused on EPUB for education as a profile and how that impacts university students. And then we're also running workshops at various conferences. So we did one in Accessing Higher Ground this year, which was just like a walkthrough of what the EPUB is and how it works, and also like a basic idea of what the structure is. They're doing a couple at CSUN right now. We have a few different teams that are talking about it. So we're hoping to get some outreach there as well. And then we're also sort of like doing some outreach on campus and talking to DSS offices and talking to professors and just trying to get them a little bit more familiar and comfortable with the format.
Thank you. You've been a great audience. Thanks
Thank
so much.
you.
Thanks for the extra time.